Empires normally announce themselves with drums, banners, and borders. They rise in the open and fall in the open, leaving ruins that tell their story. But there is another kind of empire, one that doesn't need soldiers, land, or even a name carved into stone. It spreads through balance sheets instead of battlefields, and its capital city exists inside the global financial system rather than on any map. Most people live their entire lives under its influence without realizing it. They feel its gravity in rising prices, shrinking savings, and laws designed to favor the few who truly understand money. This quiet empire doesn't conquer with armies. It conquers with incentives. Its rulers are not kings or generals, but networks, banking dynasties, multi-generational institutions, private funds, global lenders, and transnational interests that shape economic policy long before voters ever hear about it. They do not meet on public balconies. They meet in boardrooms, in retreats, at conferences where cameras are not allowed. What they decide in hours can alter the trajectory of nations for decades. Most people think of power as something dramatic, but most power is administered quietly. Invisible hands adjusting levers in a system most citizens never learn to see. That is where this empire thrives, behind the curtain, beneath the surface, inside the architecture of the money we use every day. Here, on Beyond the Coin TV, we try to uncover the history behind that architecture. Because when you understand who designs the rules of money, you begin to understand who truly runs the world, and how long they've been doing it. To understand an empire without a flag, we must start centuries before modern banking, back when merchants, not monarchs, controlled the arteries of wealth. In medieval Italy, trading families learned something profound. Money could create more money, and influence could expand far beyond physical borders. Venice, Florence, and Genoa became laboratories of early financial power. Lending replaced warfare as the primary method of conquest. By the 1400s, families like the Medicis had discovered a machine more powerful than any kingdom's army: the ability to move capital quietly across Europe. They financed popes, kings, trade routes, and wars. When monarchs needed money, they knelt not before other rulers, but before bankers. This was the first blueprint for the flagless empire. Control the flow of money, and you control the decisions of those who control everything else. No need for swords, just ledgers. The idea spread. Dutch merchants refined it. British institutions industrialized it. And by the 20th century, the modern financial empire had taken shape. Decentralized, transnational, powerful, and almost impossible to resist. By the time the 1900s arrived, financial power had matured. The world industrialized, nations expanded, and governments needed vast sums to build railways, armies, and empires. That need opened the door for institutions, central banks, international lenders, insurance giants, and private banking houses whose names rarely appeared in newspapers. Institutions had one major advantage: permanence. Kings died. Companies went bankrupt. Governments changed. But institutions continued through it all, acquiring influence layer by layer. They standardized currencies, controlled interest rates, and lent money during crises, often with conditions that rewired the politics of entire nations. These were no longer merchants in counting rooms. They were architects of the global economy. Their influence shaped not just markets, but monetary policy, inflation cycles, debt structures, and even national priorities. They didn't overthrow governments. They simply made governments dependent. This was the empire's golden age: quiet control, steady hands, no flags, just signatures that moved billions. Every empire eventually selects its symbol. For Rome, it was the eagle. For Britain, the lion. For the flagless empire, the symbol was the US dollar, not through conquest, but through design. After World War II, most nations needed reconstruction. The U.S. held the world's gold reserves, industrial capacity, and stability. Through agreements and institutions built in that era, the dollar became the center of global trade and finance. If you wanted oil, food, or machinery, you needed dollars. If you wanted loans, reserves, or stability, you needed dollars. The empire had found its crown, not a symbol of a nation, but of a system. A currency backed by institutions, trust, military power, and the architecture of global finance. It spread like roots, reaching every continent. Even countries that disliked the U.S. still relied on the dollar. And with reliance comes leverage. As the world digitized, so did power. Networks replaced hierarchies. A boardroom in New York could influence factories in Asia. A hedge fund in London could shift markets in Africa with one decision. Algorithms amplified everything. The empire evolved again. Now, it wasn't just institutions. It was networks. Fund managers, corporate giants, multinational conglomerates, sovereign wealth funds, tech platforms, and global investors who could allocate capital faster than governments could respond. They didn't need borders or flags. Their authority came from mobility, money without nationality, influence without physical presence. Decisions made by a handful of individuals could lift a struggling nation or sink it. The more connected the world became, the less visible the empire grew. Influence passed through screens, contracts, data centers, and algorithmic trading terminals. Quiet, immediate, powerful. People assume their country is run by politicians. But the deeper truth is more complex. Nations operate within a financial architecture they do not fully control. Governments borrow, markets react, credit agencies evaluate, investors reward or punish. The empire remains in the background, setting the boundaries of what countries can and cannot do. A political leader may propose a new policy, but if global markets perceive it as unstable, borrowing costs rise, currencies fall, investment disappears. The government is forced to adjust, not because of voters, but because of the quiet pressures of the system. This balance is subtle. Nations still have power, but they share that power with an invisible partner, one that never stands for election, never appears on a ballot, and never apologizes for its influence. The empire isn't a villain. It's a structure, a system built over centuries to reward stability, continuity, and capital flows. But systems accumulate influence, and influence, when unchecked, becomes power. People take comfort in believing their nation is sovereign. But sovereignty is not a switch. It's a spectrum. The moment a country enters global trade, takes loans, pegs its currency, or relies on foreign capital, it steps into the empire's domain. This doesn't mean countries are powerless. It means power is shared. A nation may write its laws, but the empire writes the incentives. Politicians speak to the public, but markets respond instantly, with capital flight, currency pressure, or investment surges. These are not democratic processes. They are mechanical ones. The true insight is simple. The empire doesn't impose itself. It waits. It watches. It rewards the countries that align with its priorities and disciplines the ones that challenge its architecture. Not through armies, but through liquidity. In the modern world, liquidity is loyalty. And loyalty is what keeps the flagless empire functioning with astonishing efficiency. Empires rise, transform, and eventually fade. But the empire without a flag is different. It adapts faster than any nation. It isn't tied to geography, ideology, or culture. Its only obligation is continuity. As long as money exists, the empire will reinvent itself to manage it. Cryptocurrencies challenge it. Digital payments reshape it. Artificial intelligence accelerates it. And while some believe these innovations will decentralize power, history suggests the opposite. Every new layer of technology becomes another tool for the empire to absorb, refine, and control. The next era won't be dominated by countries but by systems. Whoever understands those systems will shape the future. The rest will simply live inside the architecture others designed. The empire without a flag isn't a conspiracy. It's a consequence of centuries of financial evolution, human incentives, and global interdependence. It is powerful because it is useful. It is quiet because noise would only get in the way. And as long as the world keeps turning, this empire, built on capital rather than conquest, will continue its work, shaping the destiny of nations with tools far more subtle than armies. For more, keep watching us.